guys? I'm Chris, and today we are back with another recipe. Today we are making a wonderful beef stew in the crock pot. Perfect winter recipe, very, very easy. You get it going in the morning and have a great hot dinner for you at night. Reheats very well too, so great thing to make on a Sunday and have leftovers for a couple days as well. Let's get it going. So we have about 3 pounds of grass-fed chuck. I'm gonna dice it up into small cubes so it cooks a little bit quicker. You could also use stew meat that you could find at the store. Same thing, I like buying the chuck because it has very nice marbling and you can dice it yourself. I have some homemade bone broth. Anytime you could use homemade broth or stock, it's gonna take the flavor up a notch as well. I have the usual vegetables in a stock and good quality red wine and some fresh herbs, some rosemary, some thyme, and some bay leaves. All right, well, we're gonna start by chopping our veggies. For any recipe, I love prepping everything first, cleaning up, and it makes for a much more enjoyable cooking process. Do that before the heat is on. If you are chopping stuff when the heat is on, it's gonna be a mess, and it'll be much smoother if you just get the prep out of the way, set everything aside, then turn the heat on. I like to separate things with the order I'm cooking them. So for example, these celery and the carrots are gonna go in together, so I'll keep them in a separate container. That way each step is just the bowl that I toss in. You don't have to think about it. Did you know these are from the farm, these carrots? It's grass-fed. If you like carrots crunchier, you can put them in later. I like putting them in the beginning because I like when the carrots are a little bit softer, but it's totally up to you. Got some celery from the farm. I'm gonna cut stuff a little bit smaller just so it cooks quicker. All right. The good thing about this, once you do the prep up front, pop it in the crock pot, and then you can clean up and relax, and it's done. That's why slow cooker recipes are some of my favorite. There's nothing worse than eating when you know you have to clean up a mess after when you're on a full stomach. All right, so I'm going to dice these up. I'm gonna dice them pretty small because just for filming purposes, it'll cook a little bit quicker, but you could pretty much dice it like 1-inch cubes is probably perfect. With these, there's a little fat here. I'm not gonna get rid of a lot of the fat, but some stuff like this might be a little chewy in the final product, so I'm gonna trim a little bit of just the extra fat, but obviously there's a lot of nice marbling in the meat, so it'll be plenty of fat. I'm gonna kinda cut it how it's naturally separated, about this size. So yeah, see this one here is naturally kind of separating. So I'll just kind of make my life easier and go with it. And if you leave some, or you leave all, it'll be totally fine, but you know, some of this could be a little chewy. All right, so we cubed up the meat. Now what we're gonna do is sear it. We're going to utilize the fond that develops on the bottom of the pan after searing. We're gonna cook the onions, the garlic, the tomato paste. I'm gonna add a little bit of wine to release the flavor from the bottom of the pan. We're gonna throw everything in the crock pot and then we'll be good to go. So we're gonna season the meat first, sear it. We wanna make sure it's completely dry when we're searing it. If there's any moisture, it's going to prevent you from getting a really nice sear. Anytime you're searing anything, make sure it's completely dry. So I'm just gonna go ahead and season these generously. There's gonna be more salt in the stew, so you don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we could be pretty generous. Put a little pepper. Just gonna mix it up by hand. Oh yeah. Now, if you leave it too long after salting, it will start releasing some moisture, so make sure to sear it quickly after, or just pat it dry again right before you're searing it. So I am gonna sear the meat. I'm using a little avocado oil. I would have liked to use tallow, but I don't have any right now. So I'm gonna use avocado oil, good for neutral, high smoke point searing. Going to sear the meat in batches. If we're gonna crowd the pan, it's gonna cool down, not gonna get a good sear. So I'll probably do it in 2 or 3 batches. So like I said, I'm gonna pat it dry a little bit more because it's been a couple minutes since I seasoned it. We want this to be smoking hot. We want to get a very nice sear. Be patient here as well. If it's not going to set off the fire alarm, not good enough. Like I said earlier, using homemade broth is the easiest way to take the flavor up a notch in any recipe. Having it in the freezer is awesome. You can make a huge batch of it. If you need the recipe, check out my YouTube video on how I make the bone broth. I'm gonna add some avocado oil, and it's already starting to bubble. That means it's very hot. It doesn't make that sound when you put it on, it's not hot enough. Being patient when searing meat is one of the best things you can do to improve a dish. So many people are in a rush, they leave it kind of gray. You really want to be patient. Take the extra couple minutes and get that nice crust, and that's gonna make the final dish so much more flavorful. Not only are you developing a nice crust on the meat, you're developing that fond on the bottom of the pan, and when we add the wine, it's going to release that, and all that flavor is gonna be in the final dish. So really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So we're doing this in 3 batches. Again, we don't want to overcrowd the pan. That is going to cool it down. You're not going to get a nice sear. So again, be patient here. It will be worth it. It's a few extra minutes. This is that nice sear we're looking for. I've had a lot of people ask me, how long should you sear it for? And you should never have a set time. Just look at the color. When it's golden brown, it's done. Could take a minute, it could take 5 minutes, but if I were to give you a certain time, I cannot guarantee that it's gonna be nicely seared. So whenever you're searing anything, forget the time, just look at it, look at the color, and that's how you know. Last batch. So this is what we are looking for when we're done searing. That's what we call the fond on the bottom of the pan. That is all flavored, condensed. When we add the wine, it's going to release that, and that will all be in the final product. So that's what you want after a nice sear. So we're gonna add a little bit extra oil. You don't have to, but if looking a little dry, you can. We're gonna go in with the onions. I'm gonna cook these down for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Just gonna add a pinch of salt here. It will help kind of soften them up. Now, there is the option to skip this and just throw everything in the crock pot and let it go. Won't be as good, but it still would be pretty good. I do think it's worth the few extra steps though to get that nice sear, and it will make it better. Doesn't have to be fully cooked here because again, everything's gonna be cooking in the crock pot. I'm gonna add the garlic, cook it for about a minute until fragrant, as they say. Now I'm going to add the tomato paste, about 3 tablespoons. And we're gonna let that get nice and caramelized. See that fond on the bottom of the pan there? We wanna get this really dark red and make it a real nice, rich flavor. Last step before the crock pot, add the wine. And use a wooden spoon to scrape the bottom of the pan, and that will release everything. And look at that nice deep color. The bottom of your pan should always be nice and clean after this. It makes cleanup easier as well. We're gonna cook this down just for couple minutes, let it reduce a little bit. It doesn't have to be fully reduced. All right, so now we're just going to throw everything in the crock pot and let it do its thing. Just making that noise because I've kind of preheated the crock pot. As you can see, there's nothing on the bottom of the pan. That's all in the sauce. So we're just gonna throw everything else in the homemade bone broth. We are going to add all of the meat and juices. It's a lot of meat, you don't need that much. Our veggies, our potatoes. And as this cooks more, the liquid will come out and everything will be covered a little bit more. But if you feel like you need, you can always add extra broth to cover everything. Yeah, you don't want it to be too liquidy either. Like a soup is more of a stew, but you also want everything to cook. So I put a lot of meat. I think the recipe that I have really calls for 2 pounds and this was 3, so be a little full, but as you can see, we got everything covered for the most part. We're gonna add some Worcestershire sauce, 2 tablespoons or so. 1, 2. A couple fresh bay leaves. Dried are great, but anytime I can get fresh, I will do so. And then some thyme and rosemary. You could use any herbs that you want. I would put these in a little bundle, but I couldn't find my butcher swine, so it's all good. Just gonna stir this up a little bit more. That's it, we're gonna throw it in the crock pot. I'm gonna do it on high just for time. Should be about 2-3 hours on high, probably about anywhere between 5 to 7, 8 hours on low. Depends on the crock pot, but we're gonna let it do its thing. We'll know it's done when the meat is tender and the veggies are tender, and that's really it. So periodically take a fork, see if the meat is starting to fall apart. You want it to stay intact, you don't want it to completely fall apart, but when it's tender, that's when it's done. We'll see you in a couple hours.
3 hours later.
All right, so it's been cooking in the crock pot for about 3 hours now. Like I said, I've had it on high, so it's about done. If we did low, maybe 6 to 8 hours. Just check the meat when it's tender and the vegetables are cooked. That's when you know it's done. I like the arrowroot starch. I think it's the healthiest option to thicken it up. You could also use cornstarch. You could also use flour. I prefer to avoid those, so that's why I use this, but totally up to you. You also don't need it at all, so. Cold butter. Make it nice and velvety. And we're just gonna pull those herbs out of there as well before we serve. Season to taste. Probably will need a good amount of salt. I added a bunch of homemade broth that isn't salted, so just taste. Taste for salt. Chunk more. And you want to salt a little bit along the way, but you don't want to add too much salt at the beginning, because remember, you can always add more salt, but you can never take it away. If you over salt it, it's going to be very hard to compensate for that. You do it a little bit along the way, and then you finish it up at the end. That's what I'm doing here. One more pinch. All right, we're going to serve it up. Some chunks of rosemary in there, which I am okay with. I would use a little butcher's twine or something if I had it to prevent that from happening, but it's all good. Always a little parsley to top it off. Like I said, this is a perfect winter recipe. Make a big batch on a Sunday, have leftovers for a couple days. Recipes like this reheat very well, so I love taking advantage of this. Hope you guys like this, and we'll see you soon.